Okay, good morning. Hope everybody is okay. We're going to go way back. We're going to go 87 years back. My name is Evan Weiner, and I'm going to talk about the events of 1936. And for me, one of the most unusual aspects of 1936 is that four people I'm going to talk about in this talk, I actually dealt with as a journalist. They were Marty Glickman, Sam Stoller, Gretel Bergman, and Joe DiMaggio. I liked three of them, and I didn't like DiMaggio. But anyway, and it also means I'm old. If I dealt with people who had an impact in 1936, I met them throughout my life. Jesse Owens stole the Berlin Summer Olympics in 1936. Adolf Hitler, with the Olympics in 1936, was legitimized by the world. There was a presidential election. Franklin Roosevelt, Alf Landon, 1936. The Spanish Civil War started. The Arab Revolt started. And the Arab Revolt of 1936 and the Hamas terrorist attack of 2023 seem to be one in the same. Excuse me. The Depression continues. 1936 is the year of the strike. King Edward VIII, the King of England, decides he wants to marry a commoner. He quits. There was the Electricity Act of 1936 where more people got electricity. Believe it or not, a lot of people did not have electricity in the United States in 1936. The Hoover Dam, it's my son, when he was a little kid, the Hoover Dam opened in 1936. Joltin' Joe DiMaggio makes his New York Yankees debut in 1936. There's also a book that came out in 1936 that you might be familiar with. It's called Gone with the Wind. Ever hear of that book? Margaret Mitchell actually visited her grave in Atlanta. There's a old cemetery in Atlanta called the Oakland Cemetery. And there's some interesting people who are buried there. The radio shows. The stars of the radio included Jack Benny in 1936 and The Jell-O Show. How many of you remember Jack Benny and watched the radio? You watched the radio. You didn't see any pictures, but you watched the radio. But Germany is becoming a bigger and bigger and bigger story because Adolf Hitler is thumbing his nose at the world. You got to go back to World War I. There's Kaiser Wilhelm looking over the troops. There was the World War, which basically pitted England and France against Germany, and then the Americans came in 1917. First World War ended in 1918. First World War and the subsequent peace settlements gave rise to new ambitions, rivalries, and tensions. People had high expectations that the post-war peace settlement would create a new world order and ensure that the slaughter of World War I would never be repeated. Treaty of Versailles. These are the four guys who are going to carve up the world, or Europe anyway. And the guy on the right is Woodrow Wilson, the President of the United States. He's joined in that picture by David Lloyd George of Great Britain, Vittorio Orlando of Italy, and George Clemenceau of France. The victors. And to the victors go the spoils. Treaty of Versailles, signed in June 1919, created the League of Nations, an international body intended to promote peace and prevent war. The United States would not join the League of Nations. Treaty was an uneasy compromise between the victorious allies, Britain, America, France, and Italy. Once they got the treaty signed, all of them went their separate ways. They had other agendas to fulfill. Meanwhile, in Germany, Germany was hit hard. They were forced to surrender territory, disarm, pay for the war's damages. These divisive conditions were criticized as overly vindictive by many in Britain and America. The treaty's terms caused immediate outrage and lasting bitterness in Germany. But there is an irony in all this. Yeah, there's an irony. Because Germany would emerge afterwards in a stronger position than the Allies thought that they were leaving them in. By creating Poland and Czechoslovakia and the Baltic states, The treaty put buffer zones or buffer states between Germany and its traditional rival, the Soviet Union, or prior to that, Russia. Fighting among the new states weakened them, and the geography of the new borders made them very difficult to defend. So Germany emerges from World War I, at least militarily, or possibly militarily, with small, relatively weak states on its eastern border. World War I officially ends in 1923 with the Treaty of Lausanne in Switzerland. Senior statesmen stopped working personally on the conference in June 1919, so the formal peace process really doesn't end until July 1923 with the Treaty of Lausanne, which was signed by France, Britain, Italy, Japan, Greece, Romania, and the new Republic of Turkey. So why did Hitler hate Jews? Why did he hate them? Because he believed a big lie, the big myth that kept on being repeated and repeated and repeated and repeated and repeated. A lie that has nothing, absolutely nothing in its background. That is either a man or a woman, I can't tell, and that's a German soldier getting stabbed in the back. It looks like a man, but it could be a woman because there are breasts in that picture. And of course there is the Star of David on the hat, and the hook nose, of course, because you have to be, when you're doing European anti-Semitism, you got to throw the nose in there, right? So anyway, the stab in the back. Why did Hitler hate Jews? Well, during World War I, which lasted from 1914 through 1918, Hitler, even though he was Austrian, was a soldier of the German army. At the end of the war, he and many other German soldiers like him, even though he was Austrian, couldn't get over the defeat of the German Empire, and neither could the German military. So the army command of Germany began spreading the myth that, hey, we didn't lose, our army never lost, we never lost on the battlefield. We had been betrayed. We had been betrayed. Well, who betrayed you? Who betrayed you? Stab in the back. And that's what it was called. And Hitler bought into the lie. He bought into the myth. Jews and communists betrayed the country and brought a left-wing government to power that had thrown in the towel. That was it. Had to be the Jews. And of course, because Karl Marx supposedly was Jewish and invented communism, but he wasn't, at least he renounced his Judaism, the Jews had to be behind communism. And Hitler was so incensed that here's an obscure guy who writes his own autobiography while he's in jail called Mein Kampf. Really? But anyway, he does. 100 years ago, he starts it. In his memoir and propaganda tract, Mein Kampf, My Struggle, what was his struggle? Hitler predicted a great European war that would result in the extermination of the Jewish race in Germany. Mein Kampf was written in jail. He was arrested for his participation in the beer hall push in Munich on November 9th and November 10th, 1923, when the Nazi Party tried to overthrow the German government. Hitler was released from jail in December 1924. The world would have been better if two things happened in 1924. He stayed in jail, and the United States did not pass the Reed-Johnson Immigration Act, which basically put quotas on those people from Eastern Europe. We didn't want any more of those Eastern Europeans in here. Hey, you're English, fine. German, fine. If you're from Ireland, fine. Norway, fine. And not only did they put quotas on, the quotas were based on immigration patterns in the 1890s, not the 1920 census. So they made sure that those Eastern European people could never come into the country, or at least there would only be a portion who wanted to come in could come in. These are the Nazi Party members in 1922, a bunch of degenerates in some cases, deplorables in other cases, and a real hodgepodge of people who you would probably not invite to your house. By blaming the Jews for defeat, Hitler created a stereotypical enemy. In the 1920s and early 30s, Germany, the defeated country, was still in a major economic crisis. According to the Nazis, expelling the Jews was the solution to all problems in Germany. Then another thing happened in 1932. The United States, in the middle of the Depression, decided we want all our money that we're supposed to get from Germany right now. We want it right now, and that would also hurt the German economy. On February 25th, 1932, Hitler becomes a citizen of Germany. He was born in Austria, immigrated to Germany in 1913, renounced his Australian citizenship in 1925. The political message and the promise to make Germany economically strong again won Hitler the elections. But he wasn't the guy in charge. This 80-something-year-old guy, Paul Hindenburg, was in charge, but not for long. On January 30th, 1933, von Hindenburg names Adolf Hitler leader or Führer of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or the Nazi Party, as Chancellor of Germany. And Hitler goes about ending the democracy. Well, his plan is really embraced by a lot of the German population. They kind of like him. And he's going to do away with politics and make Germany a powerful, united, one-party state. And he's going to begin flexing his muscles by showing the world we're going to have the Luftwaffe. We're not supposed to have any weaponry. We're not supposed to have an army. We're not supposed to be doing this according to the Treaty of Versailles. Hitler doesn't care. Doesn't care at all. He reforms the Luftwaffe. What did the world do? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. But there were people who were sounding the alarms, and they were ignored. This is Avery Brundage. It's a fact. He was a racist, he was an anti-Semite, and he was the head of the American Olympic Committee. He's on the left. The guy on the right is Judge Jeremiah Mahoney, and he's part of the AAU, and he's the guy who is selecting the athletes who are going to go to the 1936 Berlin Summer Games. Now, 1931, the International Olympic Committee awarded the 1936 Summer Olympics to Berlin. The choice signaled Germany's return to the world community after its isolation in the aftermath of the defeat of World War I. Hitler is not on the radar. Well, he's on the radar, but he's not in control at this point. Nazi Party leader Adolf Hitler became the Chancellor of Germany in 1933 and quickly turned the democracy into a one-party dictatorship that persecuted Jews, Romans, political opponents, homosexuals, and others. And the Nazis' claim of control of all German aspects of life is extended to sports. German sports imagery of the 1930s served to promote the myth of Aryan racial superiority and physical prowess. Have you looked at Hitler? Have you seen what he looked like? He did not have blonde hair. He didn't have blue eyes. And he wasn't built like a Greek god. He had none of that. And yet, that's what he thought Germans should look like. In sculpture and other forms, German artists idealized athletes' well-developed muscle tone and heroic strength and accentuated Aryan facial features. Hitler had none of that. Absolutely none of that. Well, there were a bunch of Jews who were part of German sports organizations, like this guy, Erich Siegel. In April 1933, an Aryans-only policy was instituted in all German athletic organizations. Non-Aryans, Jews or individuals with Jewish parents, and Roman gypsies were systematically excluded from German sports facilities and associations. The German Boxing Association expelled professional light heavyweight champion Erich Siegel, April 1933. Why? He was Jewish. Like Daniel Pran. He's another top-ranked international athlete, tennis player. And he is Germany's top-ranked tennis player. He's taken on Germany's Davis Cup team. Here's one of the four that I interviewed or knew over the years. Gretel Bergmann. I interviewed Gretel Bergmann back at the New York Athletic Club in 1993. And if you know anything about the history of the New York Athletic Club, people like me and people like Gretel Bergmann, who became Margaret Lambert, were not really supposed to be in the New York Athletic Club or the downtown athletic club. They excluded people. They excluded people. But we talked in 1993, and I said to her, 20 years ago or so, they wouldn't let you in, they wouldn't let me in, and Marsh Snyder was with me from the Associated Press, nor would they have let Marvin. And she said, better here than in Germany. Anyway, Gretel Bergmann was a world-class high jumper. She was the best female athlete in Europe, and she was expelled from her German club in 1933 and from the German Olympic team in 1939. She continued to train, and all of a sudden she's called back to Germany to train because we want you on our Olympic team. We'll talk more about that in a second. This is Ernest Janke. Ernest Janke used to be a government official in the military. He was also a member of the International Olympic Committee, and he's getting reports as you do when you're the former Assistant Secretary of the Navy. And he expressed outrage at what was going on within Hitler's Germany, and on November 25th, 1935, he sent a letter to the International Olympic Committee President, Henri Bellet-Latour. I've dealt with a lot of Olympic people over my years, and they're counts, and they're lords, and they're earls, and also if you shake hands with any of them, you better count your fingers to make sure that all 5 of them are there after you shake hands with them. Anyway, he sends a letter to Latour floating the initial idea of an American boycott of the 1936 Berlin Olympics. Now, this is what's going on in Germany as Janke sends his letter. There are people reading this board, and you see the swastikas there, talking about how horrible Jews are. These are billboards in the public square, how horrible Jews are. Well, the letter says this: neither Americans nor the representatives of other countries can take part in the games in Nazi Germany without at least acquiescing in the contempt of the Nazis for fair play and their sordid exploitation of games. The letter seemed to go unanswered. Janke was a former Assistant Secretary for the United States Navy. He was of German descent, and he would be thrown out of the exclusive club known as the International Olympic Committee delegation by July of '36, and his spot was taken by Avery Brundage, who liked the Fuhrer. December 8th, 1935, there is Jeremiah Mahoney, Judge Jeremiah Mahoney. He's choosing the Olympic, or the athletes going to the Berlin Summer Games. And he says, there's no room for discrimination on grounds of race, creed, or color in the Olympics. The AAU voted in 1933 to accept an invitation to compete at Berlin in 1936, provided Germany pledged that there would be no discrimination against Jewish athletes. If that pledge is not kept, I personally do not see why we should compete. Well, he had his critics in the United States, and one of his critics was a member of the U.S. Olympic team, a guy by the name of Ben Johnson. And Ben Johnson criticizes Mahoney for worrying about what's going on in Germany and not in the American South. Mahoney was the president of the Amateur Athletic Union, and he was responsible for selecting people like Johnson. Johnson said, the Negro in the South is discriminated against as much as the Jews in Germany. It is futile and hypocritical that Judge Mahoney should attempt to clean up conditions in Germany before cleaning up similar conditions in America. By the way, Hitler was a big fan of the American South. He liked how there was Jim Crow and second-class citizen and all that other stuff. And one of Hitler's idols, by the way, was Henry Ford as well. Americans. Well, Franklin Roosevelt is not weighing in on what's going on. And eventually he would. No bully pulpit pressure. The President of the United States, Roosevelt, urged the Americans to go to the games, which was supported by Marty Glickman, who I worked with in 1988 at his broadcasting school. For the first time in the history of the modern Olympics, people in the United States and Europe called for a boycott of the Olympics because of what would later be known as human rights abuses. But Brundage, hey, everything was cool. Everything was cool. He had assurances from Hitler, all was good. Certain Jews must understand they cannot use these games as a weapon in their boycott against the Nazis, said Brundage, who labeled the anti-Olympic campaign as a Jewish communist conspiracy. Let's see, Janke, he wasn't Jewish, he was of German background. Mahoney was Irish Catholic. James Curley, who went around the country advocating a boycott, the governor of Massachusetts, he too was Irish Catholic. Al Smith, the governor of New York, who also agreed with Mahoney, he too was Irish Catholic, so maybe Brundage didn't know what he was talking about. Oh, anyway, the games are taking place. About 12 years ago, I was in Stamford, Connecticut, giving something of this talk. It was about Marty Glickman and the 1936 Olympics in quite a bit of depth. And he was telling me, he said he was born around 1920, and his parents got him out of Germany in 1933. They were newspaper people, and they ended up in Prague. I didn't ask what happened to his parents. And if he didn't offer it, I wasn't going to ask him. Not the place to do so. But anyway, he said in 1936 he went to see his parents in Prague. And he said he took the train that went through Berlin, went through Germany, ended up in Prague. He said everything was fine. He said he was surprised. Nobody called him a dirty Jew. Nobody cursed him out. Nobody spit at him. But when he came back after the Olympics, doing the same train trip back to England, he was called all kinds of names. He was spit at. He was kicked at. That's what was going on in Germany, except for a couple of weeks. In August, the Nazi regime tried to camouflage its violent racist past while it hosted the Summer Olympics. Most anti-Jewish signs temporarily removed. Newspapers toned down their harsh rhetoric. It was all an illusion, like that guy told me. The Berlin Games to be presented to foreign spectators and journalists with a false image of a peaceful, tolerant Germany. Or as Mel Brooks once said, Hitler with a song in his heart. It was a propaganda window, and there's no turning back after the Olympics for Adolf Hitler. He got his coup. He got his coup, the propaganda coup. 49 nations sent teams to the games. It legitimized Hitler and the Hitler regime in the eyes of the world, and more importantly, the German domestic audiences. And TV is developed during this time. 1935, there's a German family watching TV. Hitler was going to use television. He was going to use television to control all the messages. The first regular electronic television service in Germany began in Berlin, March 22nd, 1935. It used a 180-line system. It was on for about 90 minutes, 3 times a week. Germany used the 1936 Olympics for propaganda purposes, and it was supposed to be on TV, and it was in Berlin and Munich. The Nazis promoted an image of a strong, new, united Germany, masking the targets of the regime, the Jews and the Romas, as well as Germany's growing militarism. They were hiding the fact that they were becoming more militant. Well, Jesse Owens steals the show during 1936. And it's on TV in Germany, 8 hours a day. And you can see it in Berlin, you can see it in Hamburg. The Nazis intended to use television as a media for their propaganda. Once the number of television sets increased, but people didn't buy them. So they dropped the whole idea of TV. Okay, I knew these two guys. I worked with Marty Glickman, the fastest kid in Brooklyn, when he was 18 years old in 1936. Outgoing Marty Glickman. Hi Marty, how you doing? May that Avery Brundage rot in hell. And Sam Stoller. Hi Sam, how are you doing? Sam really didn't say much, but Marty could talk, which is why he was a broadcaster. He did New York Knicks games, New York Nets games, New York Giants games, did New York Jets games. Marty was busy as a sports broadcaster. Well, he's going to the Olympics. He's going to the Olympics, as is Sam. He's made the team. He's 18 years old. He's ready to go. But the day before his event, the 4x100 meter relay, Marty and Sam were replaced by Jesse Owens and Ralph Metcalf, the team's two fastest sprinters. Coaches claimed they needed the fastest runners to win the race, but Marty said it wasn't like that at all. The coach was Dean Cromwell, and he broke the news to Marty and Sam. But the guy who pulled the trigger in Marty's mind, and he was never able to prove it because Avery Brundage covered his tracks, was Avery Brundage. Well, the game started. Marty and Sam, they knew that they were going to win. They knew they were going to win. The team was going to win. Wanted to shove that gold medal right in the Fuhrer's face. Glickman said Coach Dean Cromwell and Avery Brundage were motivated by anti-Semitism and the desire to spare the Fuhrer the embarrassing sight of two American Jews from New York on the winning podium. Sam didn't believe that. He didn't believe that. But he was 21 at the time and described the incident in his diary as the most humiliating episode in his life. Marty again. We were shocked. Sam was completely stunned. Didn't say a word at the meeting. As a brash 18-year-old kid, he's real Brooklyn. How many of you from Brooklyn? Were you real Brooklyn? Get in the face of somebody?
Not really.
Not really? You from Brooklyn? No. You weren't, so, but Marty was. Marty was, this Jewish kid off the streets of Brooklyn. I was a brash 18-year-old kid, and I said, Coach, you can't hide world-class sprinters. At which point Jesse spoke up and said, Coach, I've won my 3 gold medals, the 100, 200 long jump. I'm tired. I've had it. Well, no, he didn't. He was on the team, and so is Metcalf, and there are Draper and Walcott, who were not Jewish. They stayed on the team. Marty said, let Marty and Sam run. This is Jesse. They deserve it. And Cromwell pointed his finger at him and he said, you'll do as you're told. In those days, black athletes did do what they were told. And Jesse was quiet after that. Why? Because of Jim Crow and the American system. The other person, well, one of the other people that I dealt with was Gretel Bergman, Margaret Lambert. I told you about, we did an interview in 1994. And we're at the New York Athletic Club. And I knew the whole story about Gretel Bergman, the best athlete, everything else. I knew that story. So I'm pretty much prepared, and in those days, everybody allowed me, even though at that time I was only 37 years old, to do all the questioning. And everybody stood back. I could do that. I must say that I knew how to do interviews. So, we're waiting for the signal. We're at this United States Olympic Committee gala fete. And, but you have to wait for the PR person to say go. Even though I've been talking to Gretel Bergman for about 15 minutes at this point, along with Mark Schneider, but I couldn't use my microphone. I don't know, maybe they were going to throw me out of the building. I don't know. But finally, they said go. And I looked at Gretel Bergman, Margaret Lambert, and I said, we start the question. I only have a one-word question. Why? Her answer was, I had to give my people hope. I had to give my people hope. 2 weeks before the Olympics began, German officials informed the Jewish athlete Gretel Bergman that she was denied a place on the team. Although she had equaled the German women's record in the high jump, the Germans sacrificed a chance for a gold medal with this action. Why? Why? You got to understand, we're losing everything. They took our jobs away. They took our education away. They took our homes away. They made us wear yellow stars. They were persecuting us at every level. I knew I was never going to make the German Olympic team. I knew that. I knew that. But I had to give my people some hope. They needed some hope. It was so bad, they needed it. Well, she never did perform. She sacrificed a chance for a gold medal with this action. But there was one Jew who did compete. One Jew who did compete for an medal. Her name was Helene Meyer. German authorities allowed a star fencer, Helene Meyer, to represent Germany at the Olympic Games in Berlin. She was viewed as a non-Aryan because her father was Jewish. She won the silver medal in the women's individual fencing, and like all the other medalists for Germany, gave the Nazi salute on the podium. No other Jewish athlete competed for Germany in the Summer Games. Jesse Owens stole the show. Adolf Hitler had hoped that the 1936 Berlin Games would prove his theory of Aryan racial superiority. Even though look at him, and there's nothing superior about him. Owens won 4 gold medals, 100 meter, 200 meter, 4x100 meter relay, and the long jump. He set 3 world records. One of those world records was in the 4x100 meter relay. He replaced Marty Glickman. One of the problems Jesse had, he was never in the relay. He had to be taught how to take the baton and give off the baton. 9 athletes who are Jewish or Jewish parentage won medals in the Nazi Olympics, including Mayer and 5 Hungarians. 7 Jewish male athletes from the United States went to Berlin. Like some of the European Jews competitors at the Olympics, many of these young men were pressured by Jewish organizations to boycott the games. Marty Glickman told me that was not on the table as far as he was concerned. He was going to fight this war. Well, this war, in his case, was winning a gold medal at the Olympics. He never did. Oh, this guy is an interesting character. He was the head of the Olympic Village in Berlin. His name was Wolfgang Fürstner. He was the vice commander of the Berlin Olympic Village during the 1936 Summer Games. He committed suicide with a pistol shot on August 19th, 3 days after the end of the Games. Why? He was afraid that officials would find out he had Jewish blood. Jesse Owens came back, got a ticker tape parade down Broadway on September 3rd. Roosevelt, though, did not invite him to the White House. Now you got to remember, 1936, Roosevelt's running for re-election, and the American South is big Democratic territory. So Roosevelt snubs Jesse Owens because he is afraid of the Southern Democrats and his re-election bid. Roosevelt, Owens talked of Roosevelt. Hitler didn't snub me. It was our president who snubbed me. The president didn't even send me a telegram. Owens defeated racism on the world stage, but he gets home, same old stuff. Well, the 1936 presidential election, it's Roosevelt against Alf Landon from Kansas. Roosevelt introduced the second New Deal in 1935 that included the Social Security Act and Works Progress Administration. The Democratic Congress also passed a major tax revision labeled by its opponents as the soap-to-rich tax. Gee, wonder where I heard that before. That raised tax rates for persons with large incomes and for large corporations. Well, Roosevelt wins rather easily. North Carolina, he gets the nomination. North Carolina's 26 votes for the nomination. He had widespread popularity, even though some of his policies were criticized, like Social Security, which was a terrible thing to a lot of people. And he got criticism from people within his own party, like Huey Long. Senator Huey Long of Louisiana, an early supporter of the president, had become dissatisfied with Roosevelt's policies. Long's Share the Wealth program, Every Man's a King, was tempting to a depression-shocked public. A private poll in spring 1935 indicated that if Long could unite the various nationwide radical movements, he could get up to 4 million votes in 1936, thus wielding a balance of power between the two major parties and represented a threat to Roosevelt's re-election. But Long was assassinated on September 9th, 1935. The U.S. presidential election. Republicans held their national convention in Cleveland, Ohio between June 8th and June 12th, and they chose Kansas Governor Alf Landon, a moderate progressive, as its nominee. The delegates unanimously ratified Landon's choice of his running mate Frank Knox, the publisher of the Chicago Daily News and a critic of the New Deal. The New Deal, give money to people, help them out. Can't do that, can't do that. Well, the presidential election, a gallant leader, Franklin Roosevelt. The legislation FDR had already shepherded to fruition, such as Social Security and unemployment benefits. Some politicians hated it, except most of the country actually liked the thought at the age of 65 to get a pension after working so hard, or get unemployment if they're fired. It was popular, except among the media class in some places, and also politicians. Landon, a political moderate, accepted most of the New Deal's agenda, although he criticized it as wasteful and inefficient. Late in the campaign, Landon also accused Roosevelt of corruption, by which he meant he had already allegedly amassed so much power that he was subverting the Constitution. Well, Roosevelt would win in a landslide. Institution forecasts the re-election of Franklin Roosevelt gives him 54% of the popular vote. So he wins the second term on May 3rd. The election took place as the Depression had entered its 8th year, and while Roosevelt was still seeking to propel his New Deal economic policies through Congress. Roosevelt did actually take 60.8% of the vote. That's a landslide. Landon barely got, or got a little more than 1 in every 3 votes. Roosevelt carried every state except Maine and Vermont, and those were 8 electoral votes. Roosevelt got 523 electoral votes. He got 98.49% of the electoral vote total. That's the highest percentage of any candidate since 1820, and since then, nobody's come close. Roosevelt has a problem. He has a problem. It's called the Spanish Civil War. On July 18th, troops under the leadership of General Francisco Franco began an uprising against the democratically elected government of Spain. The revolt quickly escalated into a civil war. The Republicans in Spain, who supported the overthrow of the Democratic Republic, were supported with munitions and money from the Soviet Union and Mexico. Volunteers nicknamed the International Brigades came from countries including Ireland, France, Poland, Canada, and the United States. And there was Franco with the troops. The coup was engineered by Franco and other generals in mid-July, launched a self-described crusade to save Spain from, again, Jewish, Masonic, Bolshevik forces, and social chaos. One should always beware, though, of those who impose salvation on the society. Behind the generals stood elements of the old ruling classes, landowners, businessmen, Catholic clergy, who were threatened by the growth of socialistic sentiments in significant segments of Spain's toiling population, separatism in Catalonia, which is the Barcelona area, and in the Basque area, which is always looking to separate, and the more traditional liberal aim of anti-clericism. Now, Roosevelt has a problem. Cannot really get involved with the Spanish Civil Wars. He's running for re-election because he wants the Catholic vote in the United States. And the Catholic vote in the United States is supporting Franco. The Spanish Civil War. Avowedly fascist groups like the Falang and the Johns rallied to the side of the rebel officers. Now, there is some sort of Arab revolt that took place about a month ago, Hamas. Tell me if I'm in 1936 or in 2023. The Arab revolt was caused by the Arab desire for independence and concern over the idea of a Jewish national home. The revolt began with spontaneous acts of violence committed by the religiously and nationalistically motivated followers of Sheikh al-Qassam, who had been killed by the British in 1935. In April, the murder of 2 Jews led to escalating violence, and the Qassamite groups initiated a general strike in Jaffa and Naples. At that point, the Arab political parties formed an Arab Higher Committee presided over the Mufti of Jerusalem, Ani el-Husseini. The Arab Revolt. Sound familiar? Sound familiar? It called for a general strike, non-payment of taxes. Of course, England was running the place. And the closing of municipal governments, although government employees were allowed to stay at work, and demanded the end of Jewish immigration, a ban on land sales to Jews, and national independence. Simultaneously with the strike, Arab rebels, joined by volunteers from neighboring Arab countries, took to the hills, attacking Jewish settlements and British installations in the northern part of the country, the Arab Revolt. By the end of the year, the movement had assumed the dimensions of a national revolt, the mainstay of which was the Arab peasants. So Roosevelt doesn't get involved in that one either. He has to do something about this because the Depression lingers in the United States. Depression brought suffering for workers. A flicker of hope came in the form of the National Labor Relations Act, known as the Wagner Act. The 1935 law guaranteed workers the right to organize and join labor unions and to engage in collective bargaining and strikes. Also set up the National Labor Relations Board, a federal agency designed to enforce labor law. But the Depression lingers and strikes begin. Strikes. Workers want more money. The United Auto Workers, a recently formed trade union, had slowly and secretly began organizing at General Motors. Organizers decided to focus on the Fisher Body Plant Number 1, Flint, Michigan, home to about 7,000 workers in the place where car bodies were being made. Organizers met with Flint workers at their homes, talked them out of walking off the job right away. Instead, the organizers planned to stop production through a sit-down strike in January of 1937 after they got their Christmas bonuses. They wanted their bonuses first. But the plan was derailed on December 30th when workers at the body plant saw critical equipment being lugged onto railroad cars to be sent to other factories. Word was out that the Flint factory was a Union stronghold. Workers gathered for an emergency meeting, flooded back into the plant. The strike was on. It was a sit-down strike inside. General Motors had been taken by surprise. Although they had suspected workers might strike, they weren't aware that they would use a new tactic of sitting down or occupying the plant. 1936 was the year of the strike. That would be settled in 1937. They got a nickel an hour raise out of that. Sensing an atmosphere friendlier to labor activism, unions went on strike, surpassing what had been done during the Roosevelt administration's first few years. There were 2,100 strikes, which was about 8% more than 1935, 17% more than 1934. 2/3 of the action took place in New York, Pennsylvania, California, and Ohio. Most of the work stoppages were in the textile industries, followed by construction and transportation and communication workers. Just after the Roosevelt victory, the country witnessed another round of labor militancy. Sit-down strikes rocked the auto industry with the General Motors sit-in. The Depression continued. The American unemployment rate, 16.9%. Well, this guy, Edward VIII, decided it's not good to be the king. I always thought it's good to be the king, right? Good to be the king. That's what Mel Brooks said, right? On December 11th, King Edward VIII spoke to citizens in England and its territories and announced he's leaving the throne. And his brother is going to take over, George VI, because he wants to marry the woman he loves, Mrs. Wallace Simpson, who is getting a divorce. I think now you hear about Charles and Harry and William and Meghan and who's the other one? Who's married to one? I don't follow the royals. I just know that on all the gossip rag sheets in the supermarkets, they're always talking about all these people, and I never really follow them. But apparently, it's a good thing to follow if you're in tourism in England, because people flock to see palaces and all. Edward had made his first ever royal broadcast, radio reasonably new. I was around for about 15 years at the time, so he knew the power of radio. to reach people in their homes. When Edward did eventually broadcast George VI was the new king, he was ready to go into exile. And that is the father of Queen Elizabeth, George VI. Edward VIII's attempt to gain the royal family's acceptance of Simpson, who obtained a preliminary decree of divorce on October 27, met with firm opposition. Backed by the Church of England and most politicians in both Britain and the Commonwealth. You can't marry that woman, she's divorced. This is 1936, get with the times. I found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility and to discharge my duties as king as I would wish to do without the help and support of the woman I love. That night he left for Austria apart from Simpson. They would get together in 1937 and he would go meet Adolf Hitler. Rural Electrification Act, Electricity Comes to Us. That's a book. That is a book. The Rural Electrification Act was signed into law during May. The law provided low-cost loans to rural farmers to help them create cooperative electric power companies. The cooperatives would bring electricity into homes of the rural regions of the United States. While electricity was quite common in U.S. cities during this time, much of rural America didn't have access to it. I once gave a talk at Central Michigan University, and this guy, Walter Schneider, brought me in. This is 1999. I guess it was 1999. And he was talking about growing up in southwestern Michigan, and he never saw indoor plumbing until he got to college. Never saw indoor plumbing. Hoover Dam opens. There is Hoover Dam, the picture I took of it. Hoover Dam is a concrete arch gravity dam in the Black Canyon of the Colorado River on the border between Nevada and Arizona. It was constructed between 1931 and 1936 during the Great Depression, dedicated on September 30th, 1935 by Roosevelt, and it opens in 1936. Oh, here's the fourth one I've known, or knew, Joe DiMaggio. I'm going to say this. I didn't like him. I don't think he liked anybody. His brother Dominic was polar opposite. He was gregarious, slap you on the back, tell you jokes, shake hands. You wanted to be with Dominic DiMaggio. You did not want to be with Joe D. You really didn't want to be with him. And he made it clear he didn't want to be with you. Joe DiMaggio joined the New York Yankees. He played for his hometown, San Francisco Seals, of the minor league Pacific Coast League, starting in 1932. November 21st, 1934, the Yankees traded 4 players and sent money to the San Francisco Seals for DiMaggio. He came up in 1936. The book, Gone with the Wind, not the movie, the book, Gone with the Wind, comes out in June. Margaret Mitchell's novel, Gone with the Wind. Book based on the life of the fictional Southern belle Scarlett O'Hara in Atlanta prior to the outbreak of the Civil War, during the war, and during Reconstruction. The book became one of the best-selling novels in history. Radio is big. People watched radio. They watched radio. I asked people, what'd you see? They said nothing. But you had to imagine what was going on, which is why it was called Theater of the Imagination. Major Bowes Amateur Hour, NBC Red, Chase and Sanborn sponsor, 45.2 rating, Sunday night at 8 o'clock Eastern Time. Meaning, out of the 100% of the universe that was available, 45% of the people watched it. Fleischman Yeast Hour by Rudy Valley. I tell people Rudy Valley was as big as Sinatra. He was as big as Bing Crosby. He was as big as the Beatles and Elvis for a short time. He was on radio. He had the second most listened to radio show, also on NBC. He had a 28.2 rating Thursday nights at 8 o'clock. Well, the Jell-O program with Jack Benny. It was on NBC Blue, the Jell-O Gelatin sponsor show with Rochester and Dennis Day wasn't with them at that point. But Don Wilson was there. Dennis Day would come later. I think it was Kenny Baker who was there at that point. 26.8% rating. Sunday nights, 7 o'clock. His daughter wrote a book, Sunday nights at 7 o'clock. about growing up with Jack Benny. So, we're at the end here, and we're going to talk about 1936, the legacy. President Gerald Ford with Jesse Owens. After 1936, Jesse Owens, an Olympic star, accepted a job as a playground instructor for underprivileged youth in Cleveland, earning about $30 a week. He became a band leader, owner of a basketball team, part-time owner in a dry cleaning business. Now, this is indignity. In 1940, with money he earns in an exhibition race against a horse, he raced a horse. He returned to Ohio State University to resume his studies. In 1949, the Owens family moves to Chicago, where Jesse launches a public relations company, travels extensively speaking on athletic competition and its ability to inspire race relations. 1976, President Gerald Ford presents Jesse Owens the Medal of Freedom, the highest honor the U.S. bestows on a civilian. Okay, what happened to the Olympians from Eastern Europe who ended up in the Olympics in 1936? Didn't end well for some of them, like Roman Cantor. Many Jewish athletes who either competed in the Olympics prior to 1936 or the 1936 Olympics itself would die in concentration camps during the Holocaust. Among them, E.G. Zabrin, a Polish swimmer, and Roman Cantor, a Polish fencer, both of whom competed in 1936 and would die in Vijandik. Elaine Meyer died young, 42. And did not leave much correspondence. There were no film clips of her talking about her time. She never wrote a book. She fled to California in 1940. I don't know if she left with $10 in her pocket like Gretel Bergman did, because she came over with her fiance and then husband, Dr. Bruno Lambert. Two of them had 20 bucks in their pocket. They ended up in Forest Hills. He became a physician, and she was rediscovered in the 1980s. In 2000, Sports Illustrated named Mayer the greatest fencer of the 20th century. Germany may bid for the 2036 Summer Olympics. Destination, Berlin. Not sure how you celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Hitler Olympics, but they plan to use it as an educational tool. The 1936, that's of course Iwo Jima. Germany invaded Poland, September 1st, 1939. That started World War II. The United States would enter the war on December 8th, 1941, after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. The war ended in 1945. Cadiz, Spain, during siesta. The Nationalists won the Civil War in 1939. Franco would hang on to power until his death in 1975. He would rescue about 45,000 Jews. Franco did not recognize Israel, but he maintained strong relations with the Arab world. On December 16, 1968, the Spanish government formally revoked the 1492 Edict of Expulsion against Spain's Jewish population. Things are still blowing up in the Mideast. On June 1937, a British commission reported that the Arab revolt was caused by the Arab desire for independence and concern over the idea of a national Jewish homeland. The committee advised the partition of Palestine. Additionally, it recommended the compulsory transfer of the Arab Palestinians from the territories earmarked for the Jewish state. The Arabs rejected the proposal and stepped up the revolt in 37 and 38. Middle East problems have never been resolved. A breadline in New York City in 1936. The Depression lasted from 1929 to 1941. It was the longest and deepest downturn in the history of the United States in the modern industrial economy. The UAW became one of the most powerful unions in America. Edward VIII. He lived in Paris on the French Riviera with Wallace Simpson after his abdication. He would meet with Adolf Hitler in 1937 and was convinced England could never beat Germany in a war. Edward saw German victory or negotiated peace as routes to getting back on the throne and as a means of his wife becoming the queen. It was clear from the documentary evidence, including German archives discovered after the war, that Edward's activities in Spain and Portugal in 1940 amounted to treason. His role in history has been overshadowed by his romance. 1936 legacy and electricity. The Rural Electrification Act of 1936 was created to bring electricity to farms. In 1936, nearly 90% of farms lacked electric power because the cost to get electricity to rural areas were prohibitive. In 1950, or by 1950, 80% of U.S. farms had electricity. Boulder Dam was renamed Hoover Dam in 1947. And there is Joe D., the Yankee Clipper. In 13 seasons, Joe DiMaggio's teams won 10 American League pennants, 9 World Series. 1969, voted the game's greatest living player. He was the Yankee Clipper. He was a cultural icon in the 20th century. Gone with the Wind, the movie, was released in 1939. In 2020, Warner Media removed Gone with the Wind from its streaming platform, HBO Max, for 2 weeks. HBO Max, or Max, said the 1939 film was a product of its time, depicted ethnic and racial prejudices that were wrong then and wrong today. When the movie returned to the platform, a disclaimer, video introduction discussed the movie's history and put it into context of 1939 or 1940 entertainment. The radio. Radio was enjoying its golden days in 1936, but television was developing. By 1955, the golden age of radio was over. Old-time radio shows are available on computers and phones today. Radio stations today have little value, and AM radio stations are disappearing. Thank you so much. Any questions, any comments? It's your turn to talk.